Can you imagine being able to win any negotiation, from a casual chat to a multi-million-dollar contract, without giving up even an inch of your interests? Harvard negotiators have made it possible, and today we will reveal their secrets to you. In today's world, knowing how to negotiate is not just a skill. It is an advantage that can open many doors for you. And in their book, Getting to Yes, The Art of Negotiating Without Giving In, Harvard experts have outlined strategies that will completely transform the way you approach and close deals. What if I told you that a big part of success in a negotiation doesn't depend on how good you are at convincing the other person, but on something much simpler, something you can start using today, regardless of whether you're an expert or have never negotiated before? In this video, we're going to dive into the principles that have helped business leaders, diplomats, and elite negotiators achieve extraordinary deals, even in the most tense of times. Get ready to discover how you can stand firm on your goals without getting into conflict, without compromising on what you really want. Let's get started. Since its release in 1981, this book has been a global phenomenon, translated into dozens of languages and recommended by universities, companies, and leaders around the world. Written by Harvard University experts Roger Fisher, William Ury, and Bruce Patton, Getting to Yes completely changed the way people approach conflicts and negotiations. Since its publication, millions of people, from businessmen to diplomats, have found in its pages the key to reaching agreements without having to give in on the essentials. So what makes this book so revolutionary? Unlike traditional negotiation methods, which focus on winning or losing, the authors developed the Harvard method, which seeks to find solutions where both parties win. In other words, instead of focusing on fixed positions and confrontations, this method proposes focusing on the interests of each party to build solid agreements. This way, much more lasting deals are built, where no one leaves feeling like a loser. In other words, instead of confronting each other, this method makes both parties collaborate to create solutions that really work for everyone. The success of Getting to Yes is in its simplicity and in the fact that it can be applied to all kinds of situations. Whether you're negotiating an important contract, resolving a problem with a coworker, or agreeing on something in a relationship, the principles in this book work in any conversation or conflict. One of the biggest mistakes when negotiating is taking conflicts personally. It's common that when someone rejects an idea or opposes something, we see it as a direct attack or as if they were telling us we're wrong. But the Harvard method gives us a different perspective. It invites us to separate emotions and people from the problem. The idea is not to fall into the game of emotions, and to remember that the goal is to resolve the conflict without ruining the relationship with the other person. This may sound complicated, especially when one is fully involved in the negotiation and has expectations involved, but it is essential to reach effective and lasting agreements. Most of the time, people hold on to their position because of something they care about or need, not because they want to make your life miserable. Imagine a common situation in the business world. You're in a meeting with a partner and you present a proposal that sounds perfect to you. However, your partner immediately rejects it. The easy way would be to think that he's doing this because he doesn't like your work or because he's putting up obstacles for you. But instead of taking it personally, you can ask him, "What are you worried about with this proposal?" By asking this simple question, you're opening the door for him to voice his concerns while also showing that you're willing to listen. This small shift in focus can make a big difference, as it allows you to see the problem from another perspective and work together to find a solution that works for both of you. Separating emotions from negotiation not only reduces tensions, but also increases the chances of reaching win-win agreements. It also shows the other person that you value their opinion and are willing to collaborate, which strengthens the relationship and makes it easier to find common ground in future negotiations. If you found today's video useful, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next content. When we talk about negotiation, we often get stuck in positions, that is, in what each party says they want. A position is basically that specific demand or request that each party puts on the table, such as an employee asking for a raise or a company wanting to reduce costs. But, according to the Harvard method, staying only in those positions can make the negotiation become rigid and even conflictual. What is really interesting is to understand the interests behind those positions, that is, the real reasons that lead each person to ask for what they ask for. And this is where an opportunity often opens up to resolve the conflict in a more creative and effective way. Let's think of interests as the driving forces behind every position. They're those deep-seated reasons that aren't always obvious at first glance. Imagine a customer who is very adamant about asking for a lower price for a service. On the surface, it seems like they just want to pay less, but if we go deeper and explore their interests, we might discover that what they really need is to feel confident that they're getting good value for their investment, or that they're on a budget and can't afford to spend more. Rather than arguing or blocking the other person's position, it's about looking for those underlying needs and figuring out if there are ways to meet them without having to give up what you want. Let's think, for example, about a typical salary negotiation. The employee asks for a raise, and the company responds that it doesn't have the budget. If both parties stay in those positions, they probably won't reach an agreement, or if they do, it won't be satisfactory to either of them. But if the employer goes further and asks what deeper interest the employee has in asking for the raise, he or she can discover other ways to resolve the issue. Perhaps the employee needs to feel that his or her efforts are valued, and that he or she has a path to growth in the company. So, even if the raise can't be granted, the employer could offer the employee the possibility of attending a training course that interests him or her, or offer other types of benefits that he or she also values. In this way, the company responds to the employee's interest in feeling valued and growing professionally, and it also manages to take care of its finances. The power of focusing on interests and not just positions is that it opens the door to creative solutions and allows both parties to win without having to confront each other. This approach also fosters a respectful and collaborative relationship, as both people feel like they are working together to find a solution, rather than competing over who gets their way. Generate mutual benefit options. When we are in the middle of a negotiation, it is easy to fall into the classic give and take. I want this, you want that, and the conversation becomes a tug-of-war that rarely leads to a solution that makes both parties happy. This is where one of the most effective principles of the Harvard method comes in: creating options before making decisions. The idea is that instead of just arguing about a single solution, both parties spend time thinking about alternatives that can satisfy everyone. By opening the mind to different possibilities, options are often found that neither one nor the other had considered at the beginning. This approach is liberating because it takes us out of that either you or me mentality and instead brings us into the realm of what can we do together. Imagine you're in a negotiation where the two sides have quite different viewpoints. Harvard recommends brainstorming without a filter. That is, putting all the options you can think of on the table. Once you have several options available, both sides can take the time to analyze them and see which ones are viable, which ones could be accommodated, and which ones wouldn't work. Let's say a landlord and a tenant are arguing about a rent increase. The landlord wants more money, while the tenant wants to avoid a drastic increase in expenses. Instead of being stuck in that stalemate, the two could sit down and brainstorm alternatives. Perhaps they could consider extending the lease in exchange for a gradual increase rather than a sharp one. Or perhaps the landlord could make some improvements to the apartment, which would justify the increase and also add value to the place for the tenant. This way, instead of fighting each other, they're collaborating to find a middle ground that benefits both. The most valuable thing about this method is that by creating multiple options, negotiations are often less tense and much more productive. Both parties feel that they are actively participating in building a solution, rather than simply accepting or rejecting what the other proposes. This helps strengthen the relationship, as both parties see themselves as involved in finding a solution, rather than as opponents who are only defending their side. Insist on objective criteria. Negotiations often get bogged down because each side is stuck on their own view of what is fair. Each believes their perspective is the right one, and when no agreement is reached, the atmosphere becomes charged with emotion and frustration. This is where another key tenet of the Harvard method comes in: using objective criteria. Instead of relying solely on personal opinions or desires, the idea is to base decisions on external data, norms, or standards that both sides can accept as a basis. By relying on objective criteria, much of the emotional burden is removed, and this makes the negotiation more concrete, where you look for what makes sense from a neutral point of view. Objective criteria can be anything from market prices, legal regulations, industry standards, or even historical precedents. Anything that can be seen as impartial and that both parties respect. Let's consider the case of two companies trying to set a price in a transaction. If each one sticks to its initial position of, I want it cheaper versus, I need to charge more, they can spend days or even months arguing without reaching any agreement. But if they decide instead to rely on an external criterion, such as current market prices or a report from a trusted consultancy, the process becomes much more fluid. In this way, the price is not defined only by what one company wants and the other is willing to accept, but by a value that both parties consider reasonable because it is backed by reliable data. The advantage of using objective criteria is that it helps depersonalize the negotiation. This generates trust because both parties feel that they are building an agreement based on facts, not whims or individual perceptions. In addition, it prevents reaching that classic stalemate of either you give me what I ask for, or the conversation ends here. In short, when negotiations get complicated, resorting to objective criteria prevents the process from becoming a battle of egos or a competition of who can last the longest. Negotiating is not about winning or losing. It is about finding ways that satisfy the interests of both parties. Harvard negotiators teach us that negotiation is an art that can be learned and perfected. Are you ready to start getting a yes every time? We'll read you in the comments. If you like this content, remember to give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video.